and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm your host, Nithya Subramanian, an editor here, and with me today are two guests, Professor C. Mohan, visiting research professor at ISAS, and Dr. Chulanee Attanayake, a research fellow here. We will discuss with them the recent visit of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi to Sri Lanka and the Maldives. This visit is important for these two Indian Ocean island countries, not only in the current geopolitical and economic context, but also historically as they both celebrate landmark years in their bilateral ties with China. So without further ado, let me welcome Professor Mohan and Dr. Chulanee. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nithya. It's great to be on this podcast.
Thank you, Nithya. It's a pleasure to be here.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi started 2022 by keeping up with the tradition of visiting three African countries, Eritrea, Kenya, and the Comoros, followed by stopovers at the Maldives and Sri Lanka, two South Asian island states where China has been trying to grow its influence. Could you please share your thoughts on this visit and some of the key takeaways that stood out for both of you? Professor, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think what you said about the annual tour of Africa, that's been now the custom for the US foreign minister. But what is distinctive this time is that the whole visit of the five countries had a distinct Indian Ocean flavor to it. Because both Eritrea and Kenya, where he stopped in Africa, are Indian Ocean littoral countries. Eritrea is in the Red Sea coast, which has become very important as the connecting zone between the Indian Ocean and Europe. And in the it is located in the Horn of Africa, where China has the first foreign military base. So they're trying to build that relationship. And then you have Kenya, which is really been historic, element of the Indian Ocean networks, and it has a large enough coast, and it has important ports. Then you have the Comoros, which again is an island just to the north of the Mozambique Channel, and then from there it branches off to the two South Asian Indian Ocean island states, that is Maldives and Sri Lanka. So I think it gives a general recognition that Africa is important for the Indian Ocean, and two, beginning to see in an integrated way that you're not thinking of South Asia as different from African East Coast, but if you think of it as an integrated zone, then I think both the two littoral countries as well as the three island countries fit into a pattern. So my basic takeaway is that it underlines China's commitment to raise their profile in the Indian Ocean. And over the last decade and more, China has also devoted special attention to island states, which are very critical for any maritime strategy. And I think he's simply reinforcing both these importance of the Indian Ocean and the special importance of the three island states, Comoros, Maldives, and Sri Lanka.
Dr. Chulanee, your comments, please.
Yes, Nithya, I think Prof. Very well summarized the importance of the visit and the significance of it. And as he rightly pointed out, this is a customary visit for the Chinese foreign minister to always start the new year with visiting Africa. But this time, the importance is that they are visiting countries which are important legs of its maritime trade in the Indian Ocean region. I think another important factor, particularly for the Indian Ocean island states, Sri Lanka and Maldives, is the fact that they are marking diplomatic anniversaries in this year. Maldives is celebrating the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Sri Lanka has two celebrations, 65 years of establishing diplomatic relations and 70 years of signing the Rice Rubber Act, which is considered as the beginning of contemporary China-Sri Lanka relations. So what we see in this visit, particularly in India, Sri Lanka and Maldives, is a focus on emphasizing on this diplomatic relationship anniversaries. In Sri Lanka particularly, they are they are going to hold a series of activities to celebrate the landmark of their relationship and to strengthen cooperation in various fields, etc., etc. So for me, I think particularly when I look at Sri Lanka-China relations, there are a couple of interesting factors. Apart from strengthening bilateral relationships in various fields, which they discussed, President Rajapaksa was seen reaching out to China in terms of getting assistance for the current economic crisis the country is facing. President made two particular requests. One is on concessional trade credit scheme to be initiated for imports from China. And as we know, China is Sri Lanka's largest import partner. And the second request is to restructure the debt repayments as a solution to the economic crisis. Now, these requests do not come as a surprise, to be honest, because of the economic condition of the country. And this also, I think, will be associated with the perception of Chinese debt trap, even though there are some misplaced argument with regard to that. Overall, China is the fourth biggest lender for Sri Lanka, but it is the second largest bilateral lender behind Japan. And in the past also, Sri Lanka has always reached to China in support of economic difficulties and worries. From China's part, I think what was, for me, what highlighted, and this again, I think connected to what Prof said earlier with regard to China's commitment to Indian Ocean region. During the meeting with Foreign Minister G.L. Peiris, Prime Minister Wang Yi proposes to have a forum on Indian Ocean island countries as a way of promoting common development. Now, we know that Indian Ocean region has enough platforms to promote its solidarity. There's IORA, there's IOMAC, there's Indian Ocean Conference, which had its 8th conference this year. Then Sri Lanka inaugurated Goal Dialogue to discuss security and maritime issues. But in any, what is significant about these existing platforms it's always India that is taking a leadership role. So for me, I think China emphasizing on and suggesting a new forum on Indian Ocean island states in particular, it is also trying to emphasize the need of taking a leadership role in the region and perhaps trying to, despite it has historically being an external player, trying to emphasize that it is not going to be an external player anymore. It is very much going to be an active geographic player in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Chulanee, for that perspective. And you rightly talked about the celebrations, the bilateral celebrations between the two countries. But in the recent months, especially in December, there was some tension in the relationship between China and Sri Lanka, with Sri Lanka rejecting an organic fertilizer shipment from China and China suspending work on a hybrid energy project, citing security concern from a third party referring to India. What is your assessment of the current state of relationship between the two countries in the wake of these developments? We did see a lot of bonhomie. From what you're saying, there was a lot of friendship and friendly vibes between the two countries during this visit. But realistically, what would be the assessment?
You're right, Nitya. I think the past couple of months was somewhat unlikely for China-Sri Lanka relations, especially under Rajapaksa administration, because of the reputation the Rajapaksa administration has to have a China tilt foreign policy. I think these two particular aspects that you highlighted are two different factors. One being the fertilizer issue. I think there actually both China and Sri Lanka would have handled it better diplomatically, in my personal perspective, rather than going into the public media and providing ammunition for the critics to scrutinize the relationship even more. The two countries should have done a behind the door discussion before it escalated into a diplomatic tension in the public sphere. When it comes to the hybrid power project, I think this is a very significant step that China has taken in terms of its relationship in Sri Lanka, and also its so-called competition with India in Sri Lanka. Because what we see in general is a situation where there are very specific geographic divide between India and China when they invest in Sri Lanka. India always choose geographical areas where there's a majority Tamil population, particularly north and east, and some part of the central province, whereas China usually put their money and investment in the Sinhala majority area. But what we saw with this effort is also China making some measures to reach out to the northern province and the Tamil community there. Previously, also China made some attempts where it tried to build some houses, but it didn't really work. Again, there were some concerns, and India always raised concerns, and then the previous government backed out of the project. I think something similar happened this time as well, because as we know, India considers Sri Lanka's northern and eastern province as its sphere of influence. No matter who's going to get involved in diplomatically or otherwise, they are going to have a concern and they will have a say in it. And Sri Lankan government has tried over and over again to emphasize that it is going to be extra sensitive to security concerns of India. So obviously, I think Sri Lanka was put in a very difficult position. On one hand, it has its long-standing friend who have been providing for Rajapaksa administration's investments, money and everything. And then on the other hand, there's India, which also has been with which Rajapaksa administration was trying to build a very cordial relationship. So this has signaled new layer into the geopolitical tension between India and China in Sri Lanka. So for Sri Lanka, I think this is going to be a very challenging situation. And I also think that Sri Lanka would try to mitigate and see how it can balance the relationship between the two countries without hurting one or the other, which would not be easy. So this is, I think, showing the challenge that we will have to face in the next couple of years, the reality that we will have to face.
Professor, what is your take on the current state of relations between China and Sri Lanka?
No, I think what Chulanee has said just now, is essentially China, from your question, has had some setbacks, not just in Sri Lanka, which we had went into some detail, but also in the Maldives, where the new government led by Ibrahim Solih now says India first foreign policy. While before his predecessor, Abdullah Yamin, he didn't say it in so many words, but it was a China first foreign policy. So there have been setbacks. So I think what Wang Yi was doing was that, look, he was telling the Maldivians, look, he's not going to take no for an answer. That just because Maldives says they have an India first foreign policy does not mean China is going to just turn its back and walk away. So they're going to keep up their engagement. That's why he came into Maldives at a time when there was this India out campaign, where the opposition parties and Abdullah Yamin is supporting it as well, saying, look, India's presence, growing presence, undermines the sovereignty of Maldives. Therefore, Indian projects should come to an end. So I think there is a pressure on the against the India First policy. I mean, we don't know how serious these demonstrations are, but the fact is there is questions being raised within the Maldives. So I think what Wang Yi is doing, that look, we are still around, in that China will have a role and they're willing to continue to support and build on the previous agreements on the infrastructure development, so that you can't simply wipe off China from the Maldives. And in Sri Lanka, he was basically saying that, look, while there were setbacks on the fertilizer issue, was resolved in China's favor towards the end, while they had to take a hit on the project in the shared waters of India and Sri Lanka. That's why he was making the point. There's no third party should not be allowed to come into the relationship between Sri Lanka and China, by saying, look, we have nothing against the third party, but you can't let the third parties disturb our relationship, that is China-Sri Lanka relationship. So that is the push. I mean, I think what is surprising, though, was that he did not announce any new agreements. He's really wanted to get this relationship back on track. That's what it seemed to me. One, there was the showcasing of China's Colombo Port City project, which is a flagship project. And Wang Yi is reported to have told, look, let's build on these two great projects. One is the Colombo Port City, and the other is the Hambantota Port. We can use these two infrastructure projects that China has done to help Sri Lanka modernize its economy, as well as overcome the current macroeconomic crisis that it has. The second point, I think Chulanee also referred to, was the Chinese are pressing Sri Lanka to say, let's start negotiations on a free trade agreement. In fact, the Sri Lankan ambassador in Beijing talked about the importance of such an agreement in an interview to Sri Lankan paper. But what I would like to know from Chulanee is that why is Sri Lanka hesitating? Because is there some issues in terms of a free trade agreement with China? Because Sri Lanka, as you know, has not been taken kindly to free trade agreements. They signed one with Singapore and walked away from it. And there's strong resistance against any free trade agreement with India. So I would like to know a little more on that. But the other thing he said, which was really set up a forum for Indian Ocean island states. I think this is a new proposal. It's an important proposal. Essentially, I think signaling that, look, China is going to take its own initiatives. That actually, and once China invites people, it's going to be pretty hard for Sri Lanka to say no, or even Maldives. So I think this is something to watch. Clearly saying, look, they have an interest here. They're going to create institutional formats. Despite, India is doing its own thing with the national security advisors of India, Sri Lanka, Maldives. There is the IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. And then there is the French, which brings in Western Indian Ocean islands, called the Indian Ocean Commission, where China is an observer. So I think this is a big step forward. I mean, in terms of intellectually crafting a new framework for the Indian Ocean from the Chinese perspective. So this is worth watching, and I think debating this. Hopefully, when we see something more, this is a subject I'm sure ISAS will take up in the days ahead.
Dr. Chulanee, would you like to respond to the query on the free trade agreement that China is pushing for?
Yeah, definitely, Nitya. I think, as Prof said, Sri Lanka has not always done well with the free trade agreements. Even though Sri Lanka claims to be one of the first countries to liberate its economy, I think what we see is going back and forth when it comes to actually implementing some of these measures. Sri Lanka do not have many free trade agreements. Only two agreements with the multilateral corporate regions and bilateral agreements with India, Pakistan, and the one Prof just mentioned, Singapore, which did not really work. They are still, after signing also, they're negotiating. So I think for Sri Lanka, it is important to have an agreement with China. China has this sort of like way of doing its foreign free trade agreements. First, it negotiate trade, and then it goes into an agreement on trade in goods, services, and investments, followed by a comprehensive FTA package. So I think what China is trying to do with Sri Lanka right now is that, and China is Sri Lanka's second largest trading partner. In 2016, it even overtook India and became the largest trading partners. But as with any other countries who has trade relationship, our relationship is also in favor of China. It has a trade imbalance. So this is actually an opportunity to improve Sri Lanka's exports to China. A study in the Institute of Policy Studies, Sri Lanka did a couple of years ago, has identified that there are 566 products that Sri Lanka can export to China, out of which 299 products are has a potential advantage vis-a-vis with the rest of the world. But for whatever the reasons, now since the negotiation started, there are I think 6 rounds of negotiations have gone. Sri Lanka has not managed to go further in this. So it is, I think, normal for China also to ask why we are not going ahead, because they see that if without a trade agreement, they can have this amount of trade advantage vis-a-vis India. If they have a trade agreement, it would be a game changer. So in China's part, I think that is why they are trying to sort of push forward with the agreement. To be honest, from Sri Lanka's side, I don't know why they are doing it, because the same way that I don't understand why we agreed the agreement with Singapore and now we are not implementing it. Because at least from the experience with India, we know that there are a lot of advantages, and it is definitely will be an advantage for Sri Lanka to get open to the Chinese market for its producers and manufacturers.
Moving on to the Maldives, Prof just talked about the India Out campaign that is making a lot of noise in Maldives, championed by President Abdullah Yameen, while President Ibrahim Soli has had a very pro-India stance. So, Prof, how do you see this competition between India and China playing out in Maldives, especially in this year when China and the Maldives celebrate 50 years of diplomatic relations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact is, Chulanee said, look, the India-China rivalry is a reality today, at least in South Asia. I mean, I think India can't compete with China everywhere in the expansive Indo-Pacific, but certainly in the Indian Ocean, next to its own territory. I think it is doing a lot more things, and China is not going to simply give up. So I think Delhi understands that China is the second largest economy and one of the world's leading military powers today, is going to be everywhere. I mean, so I think for India, it is not something you can wish China away. China is there. But at the same time, India simply can't let a hostile, developments in its own immediate neighborhood. So I think these imperatives are going to be clashing with each other, and we're going to see that. What's interesting in relation to Maldives and Sri Lanka is really how deeply intertwined the Sino-Indian dynamic has become with the domestic politics of both the countries. As we discussed earlier, I mean, Soli takes a so-called, India first position, while Yameen took a China first position. So what you have is really the intra-elite fighting, that is the competition for political power in Maldives, is not tied to the kind of external dynamic that is there in the region. Though it's such a small country, but still the competing factions are trying to mobilize different external powers to project their own, rise to power or hold on to power. So this is So it's not just about two countries' rivalry, but it is now deeply connected to the domestic politics of Maldives. And I think the same is true of Sri Lanka in a much more different way, where India's continuing support for the Tamil rights, while China says, look, we don't interfere in domestic politics. So I think it's a straightforward issue there for India. The problem is in Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese nationalism today says India is the problem. You can go back to 1983, a whole lot of developments that took place, the Indian intervention and its withdrawal. So I think and India's continuing emphasis on the Tamil rights within a united framework, of course, India is not supporting secession. But yet, is this something that the Sinhala elite does not want to give? I mean, it's not passing a judgment, but that's where the tension is between Delhi and Colombo is whatever you do, but there is that problem. And India's continuing support for Tamil rights also makes the North and East, very warm towards India. So you have an internal dynamic here. The question of devolution of power, federalism, whatever you want to call it, within Sri Lanka, is tied directly to India. While China comes in and says, look, we don't interfere in your domestic politics. We want to just engage with Colombo and we want to do good things. So which gives them an advantage. And that's why the growth of Chinese power in Sri Lanka really starts in post-2009. Civil war comes to an end. China had given some support. So what you have is actually, there is a much greater comfort level between Colombo and China. So what Chulanee said earlier, but at the same time, Chinese are figuring out now, after the project got scrapped, that they also need to reach out to the Tamil minority without looking like they're interfering. And that's why you had the Chinese ambassador going to the north, putting himself in temples, dressed like a good Tamil pilgrim, in a vesti and without a shirt, and offering to the god. And then I think he's making it clear, look, they're not going to simply walk away from the north. If that is important to be there, and they're going to try and find a way. So without taking a position on the federalism, Tamil rights issue, they can simply reach out to the north and say, look, we can give you money and we can give you development. So we're not against you. We're not against anyone. We offer development, and that's why the emphasis on new forms of aquaculture. There's a whole farming of the fish farming. They're taking in some new steps. So I think Chinese will make their presence felt in the north as well. But it tells you, but they're not going to talk about Tamil rights. While they have a problem with that's why there were protests against China in the north. But I think the main point we're trying to make as an analyst is that the internal politics of Sri Lanka has also become tied to the India-China competition. I think this will be an enduring issue. So I don't think anyone is expecting the Tamil problem to be solved tomorrow, or the problem of between Sri Lanka, Tamil Nadu, and India will be sorted out. So I think this issue will be there, and how that gets balanced out. This is where Colombo suspended the project, while at the same time continuing the engagement with China. So I think there will be a lot of balancing to do. But I would say slightly differently from Chulanee, that look, it's also an opportunity for Sri Lanka. If you have two large countries trying to woo you and ready to do things, so you play one against the other. So I think the Chinese, like you can call it non-alignment, equidistance, whatever you have, which is what Colombo calls it, equidistance. But of course, the fact is India is too close to ignore. While China, when things go wrong, the danger of Indian intervention, of course, is always there. So you can get how much you want from China. But in terms of political security, India, I'm not just talking about Indian sensitivities, but India can't be ignored. So I think that is the balancing act that Sri Lanka is doing. And my sense is other countries do it. Anybody who's next to a large country has to balance. You mobilize the external power to balance the neighbor. But at the same time, you know that you can't provoke the neighbor too much. Then you invite the wrath of the neighbor, and then the other guy can't really help you. So I think it's a complex act, but But I think it's not unique to Sri Lanka, but many countries do it. All the countries on Russia's periphery, China's periphery, all of them are doing this in different forms. So, but this is a new dynamic that will be with us.
Finally, talking about the big neighbor, how does India view Minister Wang Yi's visit and its outcome? And how do you think India will navigate China's influence in the Indian Ocean?
I think, my view is that, look, India will oppose anything that would, seen as violating, danger to its security. Like tomorrow, as like the power project in the north, or if China sets up something, something with a dual-use facility in anywhere in Sri Lanka, they're going to object, they're going to push and use their influence to stop it. But at the same time, that's only one part. But the real thing for India is, look, how does it develop its own engagement with China? So India has to play to its own strengths. So just as China has given a lot of money, for example, to bail out Sri Lanka from the crisis, India is doing the same. But they're also getting new projects done. For example, Adani Enterprises has got the Colombo West Terminal. So Sri Lanka has also figured out, look, you can't keep India out. So they're giving some projects to India, which is new because these were held up for a long time. The previous government could not decide on those. So it has given that West Terminal to India. It has also signed a new contract with India on the Trincomalee oil farm. So I think what India must focus is, look, how does it make its own relationship stronger? Rather than keeping China out is only, you can't keep China out. I mean, okay, military bases, those kind of things, yes. But the rest of it, India must bring its own economic, interdependence with Sri Lanka to a higher level so that more people in Sri Lanka see the relationship with India is of benefit to them.
Thank you, Professor Raja Mohan and Dr. Chulanee, for this insightful conversation. We are very happy to have you with us on South Asia Chat.
Thank you. It's great being here.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. Also follow us on our social media handles, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thank you.